Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Manchester United by bringing you my match review player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson and Joe Ward after the game. So let's begin. Crystal Palace fell to a harsh-looking scoreline under the lights at Selhurst Park, as an informed Manchester United side bagged 3 goals to nullify the Eagles' threatening-looking fightback. Despite Joe Ward earning them a chance to gain a point when he netted after a Romelu Lukaku brace, Palace were then defeated when Ashley Young sealed the win for the visitors late in the match. With Vicente Gaeta racing out to claim it, Lukaku was able to head towards an unguarded goal. However, Martin Kelly calmly mopped up and cleared the threat. For the second time, Lukaku came within inches of opening the scoring when, from Luke Shaw's outswinging corner, he appeared unmarked in the centre of Palace's box, only to blast narrowly wide from less than 10 yards. At the other end of the pitch, it was the Eagles who caught their oppositions unaware, as James McArthur jinked down the left wing before cutting inside to David De Gea's box, where he rolled the ball to Andros Townsend. Frustratingly, the 27-year-old could only blaze wide in similar fashion to Lukaku. Inches of the warm evening's air was all that separated the ball and the inside of the net again, as Townsend picked up possession on the edge of United's area before launching an effort at goal which went agonisingly close. But it was United who found themselves celebrating first after Lukaku, at the third time of asking, found the net with a smart finish from 18 yards, which nestled into the unmoved Gaeta's net. Immediately responding following the game's restart, Townsend whipped in a sublime cross which Jeffrey Slutt met just a little too softly, as he glanced the ball over the bar, having launched his head up from very close range. Opening the second half, Paul Pogba prodded the header over following Alexis Sanchez's chip ball, and perhaps should have done better with the opportunity. The Red Devils' dominance yielded a second, as Lukaku doubled his tally for the night following a defensive scramble. Gaeta flung himself at his feet, but the Belgian hooked the ball over under some pressure. Looking to respond, Wilfried Zaha raced a strike home from MacArthur's ball, however he was unable to meet the cross in time. Zaha came close again for the Eagles when he stepped his way past Young before unleashing a shot from a tight angle at his near post. De Gea, however, was equal to his effort. For his third chance in as many minutes, Palace's Ivorian midfield then headed over from the same post, as Selhurst Park inhaled sharply in unison. Another chance then passed the Eagles by, when James Tompkins managed to force a looping header in the direction of the goal, though it was slightly too high to open his side's account. The opener came, however, moments later via an unlikely source. With Palace retaining possession on the edge of United's box under relentless defensive questioning, Slutt broke free to crack a cross high to his right, which Ward hurdled himself out with an emphatic outcome. Palace's resurgence seemed to be catalysed by a smart substitution that saw Max Meyer take to the turf. Minutes after Ward's flying goal, the German midfielder looked to pull Palace level, but his means of doing so, a fine long-distance shot, were denied comfortably by De Gea. Seeking to build on his team's momentum, Luka Milivojevic struck a goal-bound free kick just wide, before, at the other end of the pitch, Gaeta flew himself to his left, where he thumped away a probing effort. Well on top by this point, the Eagles were to have their hopes of a comeback shattered when United's captain Young struck home with venom into their net from a shallow angle inside the box. With the game seemingly won, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer handed a first-team debut to 17-year-old James Gardner, who saw out the rest of the match with the rest of the United team, despite the best efforts of Christian Benteke, who headed low into De Gea's hands with the last chance of the night. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. So if you are someone like myself who does like to follow a vast array of Palace accounts on both Twitter and Facebook, then of course I highly recommend you do follow both our Twitter and Facebook pages at Crystal Palace. Now, like I said, there is a great place to follow to get all the latest Palace news, so whether that be about transfers, whether that be interviews with certain players or certain staff at the club, or whether that just be general news about the club, whether that be about the academy, whether that be the ladies team, the stadium, any sort of news that you want to get and you wanted to get it quite quickly, then of course follow us on both our Twitter and Facebook pages, because of course we do regularly update them. And you know, I might as well talk about transfer news in particular, because you know, we're always looking, we're always trying to source as many news articles as possible, just to sort of build a picture during the transfer window, you know, who Palace might possibly be looking at. And even though we're not in the transfer window now, we're still finding articles here and there talking about some of the possibilities for the summer. So if you are someone who, alongside just general Palace news, wants to sort of keep up to date with all of the sort of rumours with players coming in and out of the club, then of course do head over to our Twitter and Facebook pages at Crystal Palace, where of course you can access all of them. Now, alongside that, obviously I give you my opinion in the podcast, but actually there's a few guys on the page who actually post their opinion before and after the game. So if you do want another place just to get a general opinion, you know, before the game we'll sort of give our opinion on what we think about the lineup, what we think about, you know, how Hodgson's going to set up, and of course after the game giving an instant match reaction. So if you are someone who, alongside the podcast, actually just wants to listen to sort of or read an instant reaction after the game, of course follow us on our Twitter page in particular, because of course we do regularly update the stuff there. Now, another great place for you guys to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, and of course that's with 10 being the best. Now, one of the main reasons I want you to do that is that so that rather than me just having my general view of the game and of course my player ratings as to how I thought the players performed, I want you guys to comment below in the comment section how you would rate the players, and that's basically so I can read through them and see how you rated the players, and see whether we had a similar opinion of how the players performed, and obviously see if we actually had a similar outlook on the game, because I'm sure there's a few players I'm going to go on to where people may disagree with me. So if you've got a different opinion to me, or different player ratings, or even if you've got the same, just share them below so that I can read through them and basically see what you guys also thought about the game. And even if you don't want to do that, you don't want to rate the players, just comment below with your general views of the game. So whether you're a United fan, you know, you're quite happy with the job that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's doing, or you're a Palace fan thinking, well, we always lose against United, it's our bogey team, doesn't really matter, this was sort of a free hit game anyway. If that's sort of your attitude, comment that below as well, because it's not just me wanting to hear how you thought the players performed, but anything about the game that you want to comment on, you know, whether that be our formation, whether that be who was at fault for the goals, or whether you think, or whether you agree with me the fact that this was a free hit, we lost it, we never beat United anyway, doesn't really matter, but actually the big games are coming up in March. So whatever your opinion is, of course feel free to use the comment section, so of course you can share them. And it's not just so that I can read them or I can answer your questions, it's also any other fans who come to the video, whether they be United or Palace fans, they can also listen to me as well as reading through the comment section, which once again just builds up a bit of dialogue, a bit of conversation and a bit of discussion, obviously between fans. So of course if you want to get involved, of course feel free to do so. Now, if you do want to follow any of the social media pages or join our Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. So I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, starting a goal with Vicente Gaeta, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, in terms of Gaeta's performance, there isn't really too much to say in the fact that we conceded 3 goals, and arguably he probably could have done better for them, but then on another perspective, you know, he still made a few good saves here and there, so I do think the 5 overall is a fair result. Now, in terms of really early on in the game, you know, as you've heard in the match report, the fact that Lukaku had a really great chance, and he had 2 great chances actually to score, missed both of them, but then scored on the 3rd. Now, in terms of that was obviously, the ball's got to Romelu Lukaku. Obviously, Gaeta's obviously rushed out from goal, tried to claim the ball, missed it. Lukaku, I think, tried to head the ball, and of course, you know, it was almost going to go in, and I think Martin Kelly cleared it up. So there's one example there where that's sort of the first real mistake Gaeta's made, because he's so far, since he's been playing for Palace, he's been one of our most consistent performers, and that's consistent to a high standard. So of course it was a bit surprising to see him rush out of goal and try and claim the ball, but then miss it, and then Lukaku almost score from it. And I suppose that's something really unlike him, because normally he's very good on his feet, his decision making is really good, but of course on that occasion it wasn't. And the fact that it came so early on in the game could have really been costly for us. Yes, we eventually did go on to lose the game, but at that point it probably could have been by a bigger margin if United have managed to get that early goal, which ultimately they ended up doing in the first half. Not an early goal, but they still got their goal, so maybe it could have been a different story if, you know, Gaeta's mistake had actually, you know, been punished by United. But luckily it didn't, because of course Romelu Lukaku, even though he beat him to the ball, obviously Martin Kelly was able to clear it up and essentially bail out Gaeta, because obviously that's Gaeta's first mistake, so I'm not going to really dwell too much on it, but nevertheless he obviously had to rely on his defenders to clear the ball away. But then that's also what you want from defenders, because occasionally your defenders are going to make mistakes, you want the keeper to make a save, and then when your keeper makes a save you also want the defenders to cover for it. So essentially you know, Gaeta didn't do his job, but then the defender's done his job. So hopefully the fact that Gaeta's been saving defenders this season, that obviously is sort of his repayment. Now, in terms of the opening goal late in the first half, I don't really think there's anything Gaeta really could have done. Obviously, Romelu Lukaku on the edge of the area has had a shot, it's managed to trickle into the corner. Not really too much you could do about that. And essentially, because it was so late in that first half, sort of killed any rhythm that Palace had, even though we weren't good in that first half. But any sort of chance or any sort of chances we had, we weren't able to convert it. So the fact that we conceded the goal, not only obviously was a bit disappointing for Gaeta because he didn't really have too much to do in that half, but obviously the whole team morale sort of went down from that point for that early goal. Now, in terms of Ashley Young's effort, I might as well skip away from the, well, I suppose I could talk about the second goal. Obviously, Jeffrey Slupp, who I'm going to go on to, was obviously at fault for that, in the fact that he, for number one, shouldn't be marking Lukaku. But then even if he is marking Lukaku, which he was, he needs to at least try and jump, or at least try and block him, or at least try and sort of track his run better than he did. And obviously Gaeta as well for that goal, obviously once again came out of his goal. Bad decision making on his part, tried to claim the ball, but then Lukaku obviously headed past him. So you're looking at two chances in the game here, both involving Lukaku, where actually Gaeta should have done better. Obviously the one in the first half, and then the one for Lukaku's second goal. So I don't really want to talk too much about it, because I do think it's mainly down to Jeffrey Slupp, but I thought I'd put that out there, that actually was Gaeta who was also involved in that. And of course the last goal, well, there's been still images of it all over Twitter, once again mainly down to Jeffrey Slupp, because he was playing too narrow. But then if he had played wide, there would have been a space in behind. So whichever way you look at it, we're leaving too much space for Ashley Young to run onto it. And because he had the time, he had the space, and of course he also has the accuracy, because he's a relatively clinical player in that respect, I think. Well, my personal opinion of him is that if you give him a chance, he'll be able to finish it, which he did. And of course, because I had too much pace in it, because he had the time to think about it, the placement of the ball, Gaeta really didn't have any chance with that goal. So in terms of the goals, really couldn't do anything about the first, really couldn't do anything about the third, and arguably probably should have done better for the second, albeit Jeffrey Slupp was the main guy involved in that. But overall, Vicente Gaeta here, not necessarily the worst performance from him, but certainly one that's below par considering the standards he set this season, and that's just mainly down to his decision making, which normally, well, and his positioning, that's normally very good. But obviously in this game here, we saw a few chances that United had where his decision making was a bit off, so it was slightly disappointing in that respect. But you know, having seen his quality this season, and the fact that sometimes players have an off game, let's just hope this is one of his off games. But once again, Vicente Gaeta, I do think the 5 is a fair result. So we're going to move on now to the first player in our defence, and that's the right back Joe Ward, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, in terms of Joe Ward's performance, I've given him a 6. I do think, much like his performances have been this season, he hasn't necessarily put much wrong in this game, and he hasn't necessarily done anything great other than the goal he scored. So in terms of just looking at his defensive performance firstly, and looking at that aside from the goal, he had a fairly good opening 45 minutes, and the main reason why he was so good and so successful in what he was doing in that first half is just because of how well he dealt with Alexis Sanchez. So albeit Alexis Sanchez has been far, far below his par since he's joined Man United, but nevertheless he's still a quality player for them. So he was going to be one of their biggest threats with all of the players United had out injured. But the fact that Joe Ward dealt with him so well was obviously great to see. And, you know, arguably United could have had more chances in the game if we had given Alexis Sanchez more space. So the fact that Joe Ward individually dealt with him really well was something I was impressed with. And I suppose in terms of you're looking at the first goal United scored. Obviously Lukaku shot from the edge of the area, and obviously it went in. But obviously Joe Ward in particular will be quite annoyed, because he was the one who let Luke Shaw get past him really well on that side. Luke Shaw literally ran into the box, put the cross in, or not run into the box, but run to the edge of the box, put the cross in, and Lukaku scored from it. And obviously Joe Ward would be quite disappointed in the fact that A, he gave him too much space, but B, the fact that he actually didn't stop Luke Shaw's run into the box, which of course resulted in the opening goal of the night. So in terms of his performance, first half, it was really impressive in the fact that he kept Alexis Sanchez at bay. But then in terms of the goal, which was at the end of the first half, he's obviously going to be disappointing for giving him too much space and allowing him to make that run so easily into the box. Because even if he'd still made that run, but Joe Ward was at least with him or keeping up with him just to make it difficult for him to put that cross in, that would have at least been better by actually, rather than just leaving so much space out wide. Now, the thing that sort of bunks up his performance to a 5 is just the fact that he obviously brought us into the game. A great diving header from him at the back post, and obviously at that point it got it back to 2-1, and we were thinking, you know, we had so many chances and we had loads of shots and goals, so we were thinking maybe we could get back into the game. ultimately that was killed because United scored, making it 3-1. But nevertheless, Joe Ward at a point, you know, almost got us back into the game, or started our momentum, and when we were on that front foot, he helped us to get there. And you know, it was a great goal because, you know, even though I'm going to criticise Jeffrey Slupp quite a lot, a great run by Jeffrey Slupp inside the box, got to the byline, put in a fantastic high cross into the box. And obviously Joe Ward, much like his Chelsea goal a few seasons ago, absolutely rifles his header in, dives on the header, absolute bullet header past the hair into the goal right in front of the Homesdale. And even though we didn't win the game, it was nice to see us at least score a goal, and obviously nice to see an unlikely goal scorer. No one was expecting Joe Ward to score, but it was nice to see him score a goal of good quality in terms of the power he got on the header, the accuracy to get it past the hair, and the connection, I suppose, as well. The fact that he met the header perfectly, but also the fact that it was an unlikely goal score was nice to see as well. So overall, Joe Ward, giving him a 6 because I do think in the first half he dealt with Alexis Sanchez well. Obviously, probably could have done better for the first goal in particular by not giving Luke Shaw any space. But I suppose the thing that most people are going to be talking about his performance is the fact that he scored the goal. Great ball by Jeffrey Slupp, but obviously the goal itself, in terms of the headering accuracy, the timing of it, the timing of his dive, everything about that goal was really great. And you know, he doesn't score many goals for Palace, but when he does score goals, you know, they're either important for us or they're ones that are slight consolations, but nevertheless nice to see. So for me personally, I knew it was quite inevitable that we were going to lose to United, because obviously they're our bogey team. We never seem to beat them, and they're on a great run of form as well. You know, I think 12 games unbeaten in the Premier League or some massive stat like that, and I think it's 8 unbeaten away from home. So they're on a massive run of form, so I weren't expecting anything. But all I wanted from the game is that if we are going to lose the game, at least get a goal. And of course, Joe Ward did provide that. So overall, Joe Ward, I do think these 6 is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to the first of our 2 centre-backs, and that is Martin Kelly, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now really for me, I'm not really going to spend too much time on Kelly because there isn't really too much to highlight about his game, other than the fact that it was a quite subpar performance from him, and whether it's just the fact that he's not playing alongside Mamadou Sakho, or whether it's just the fact that he's just come back from an injury, whatever it was an under-par performance from him, and certainly does deserve the 5 I've given him. Now one thing in particular which I was impressed with is in about the 25th minute or so, there was obviously a chance that United had, and obviously he made a really crucial interception, so that was vital in terms of keeping United at bay. So even though I was slightly disappointed with his performance, there's one sort of move in particular where his interception was quite crucial. So I suppose in what was an overall negative performance from him, at least there's a few good things to pick out from there. But I suppose one of the reasons why his performance, or one of the reasons why he sort of struggled on his return to the side, is just because of how Lukaku was. You know, Lukaku once again wasn't on a great run of form, but we obviously like to gift strikers who are out of form goals, and essentially, you know, Martin Kelly couldn't really deal with Lukaku because he was just quicker. He was too quick for him, especially for that first goal. And obviously it was a fine finish from Lukaku, but because of that lack of pace that Kelly had, he couldn't quite keep up with Lukaku, and he scored. So really for me, the only real things that Kelly did in the game was make that important interception, which of course I was really impressed with. But then the other side of it was the fact that he made it wasn't really a mistake, because you can't really help being slower than your opponent, but the fact that he couldn't quite keep up and he wasn't quite quick enough to close Lukaku down to stop him scoring, which was a great goal. Obviously that was slightly disappointing. Now in terms of going into the second half, not really too much more to say about that, because there isn't really much of note to say. So it's slightly disappointing performance from him, especially in that first half, in terms of letting Lukaku score so freely. Wasn't necessarily too bad in the second half, but when you can see 2 goals in a half, you're going to look at it and go, a bit suspect there. But like I've said already, Jeffrey Slupp is mainly at fault for that. But overall, Martin Kelly, not too much to say about his performance, you know, other than that interception he made. So I do think the 5 overall is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to his centre-back partner, and that is James Tomkins, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now in terms of Tomkins' performance, you know, once again one of our most consistent performers in the side, and I've given him a 7 because I do think this yet again was just a consistent performance from him. Now of course Mamadou Sakho was absent, and of course he had the knee injury, obviously got taken off last weekend, or at the weekend, and of course it's looking like he's going to be out for the season now. So that's a massive loss for us, you know, with the knee injury. But you know, we need players to step up, and you know, whilst Kelly has been so reliable for us this season, this was just an under-par performance from him, which, you know, when you have one of your centre-backs not playing well, it's going to put more pressure on your opposition, or sorry, your opponent, well not your opponent, sorry, your teammate, which was James Tomkins. And actually I do think Tomkins, even though he had that extra pressure, because obviously the inclusion of Kelly wasn't quite what he's used to in terms of playing with Sakho, and I think Tompkins actually rose to the challenge, and in terms of his one-on-one duels with Lukaku in particular, he won the majority of those. So straight away you've got a comparison between him and Kelly, where Kelly found it really difficult to deal with Lukaku because of his pace, and we saw that with the goal United scored, which was their first. But then James Tompkins, sort of took it upon himself to basically make up for the fact that Kelly weren't necessarily playing to his best ability, and essentially he done that by, whenever he was having a duel with Lukaku, whenever he found himself up against him, A, made it difficult for Lukaku, but B, just won the majority of these duels, managed to win the ball or clear the ball, whatever it was, and whatever he had to do to stop Lukaku in particular, he done really well. Now, in terms of the goal, especially definitely the second one in terms of from the corner, obviously Jeffrey Slupp was marking Lukaku, which I don't understand why, because you got one of the shortest players going up against a massive striker, not really the most ideal thing. So the fact that Tompkins dealt so well in open play against Lukaku really does beg the question why he didn't actually mark him from corners, because surely if you're good at marking someone in general play, then surely from set pieces, etc., it would be better to mark him from there. So I suppose the fact that he dealt so well with Lukaku really does beg the question why he wasn't doing it for corners. But overall, it was a really decent display from him. Really impressed with him, and really sort of gave a real positive to take from the game, because it was an overall very disappointing performance. Albeit we expected it, because obviously United are on a good run of form and we never beat them anyway. But the fact that Tompkins is one of the few players to come out with credit because of how well he performed, because of how well he done against Lukaku, is obviously great to see from him. But like I've said already, he really should have. The fact that he dealt so well in out of play with Lukaku really begs the question why he should have, or why he wasn't marking him for corners. And obviously I'll go on to talk about Jeffrey Slupp in a minute, but obviously feel free to comment below with your thoughts, or obviously whether you do think or whether you agree with me that Tompkins had a good performance, and whether you do think, considering how well he done against Lukaku, maybe whether you think Tompkins should have been on the corners. But once again, good performance from Tompkins, and considering it was an under par performance from quite a lot of the team for the majority of the game, albeit in the second half we were a little bit more in the ascendancy. It's nice to see one player in particular particularly play well. Now moving on to the final player in our defence, and that is the left back Patrick Vanana, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, obviously, I've talked quite a lot already about the first half. The first half wasn't necessarily that great. We went 1-0 down late in the half, and essentially it's just because United were the better team and deserved to take the lead in at half-time, and that's just because we weren't necessarily the greatest. And Vanana was one player in particular who was very quiet in that first half, wasn't really involved, but I do think, in terms of his defensive play, he was quiet. But going forward, he did get forward on a few occasions, but to little avail, wasn't really successful. So whilst he was looking to get involved and looking to get forward quite a few times in that first half, he was just quiet because nothing really came off, and he wasn't really making his impact really known in that position. So whilst quite a lot of the team just played bad in that first half, Vanana, rather than playing bad, he was just fairly quiet, even though he was looking to get involved. Now, in terms of the second half, obviously United wanted to get that second goal to cement their lead in the game, and that obviously meant that they were attacking Palace from both sides, and especially down that left hand side where Vanana was, and essentially most of United's attacks were coming down that side. So whilst a few weeks ago I was talking about the fact that because Joe Ward was playing, obviously the opposition are going to target the right hand side, or Palace's right hand side, their left hand side, whereas in this game here, even though Ward you would argue is the weaker player out of the two fullbacks, actually United were playing much more down that left hand side, down Palace's left hand side, and I do think that I do think Vanana on the whole didn't necessarily do an absolutely terrible job, but I've given him a 5, mainly because for quite a lot of the time that United were attacking down that side, he was nowhere to be seen. So yes, it was nice to see him actually looking to get forward, looking to, essentially influence us in advanced positions. Yes, that's great, but actually in terms of his defensive work, he was out of position, and that's not just because he was going far forward, but also because he was drifting so narrow to deal with that threat that United have up top. It obviously allowed people like Ashley Young, people like Luke Shaw to obviously get on the overlap, and that's from both our fullbacks really, not exclusively to Vanana. So really for me, because it was quite worrying the fact that they were targeting him, really showed that obviously United had seen that weakness in that first half, and essentially they really capitalised on it, and we've seen with the goals they scored in terms of the space they had on the field. And obviously we yeah, we essentially saw that the fact that he weren't playing to his best, even though in recent weeks he's been slowly getting back to that. Obviously, the fact that they saw that weakness there, they smelt blood, let's say, or they sensed blood. Obviously, that's really reflected in his performance. And you're looking at the goal we conceded. I personally think the fact that Van Aanholt done all right for the majority of the game, I think that if he hadn't been subbed off and if he'd been in the right position, because Jeffrey Slutt was playing so narrow, if Van Aanholt had been playing at that point rather than being on the bench, then maybe there could have been a chance there where we wouldn't have conceded that goal because Ashley Young wouldn't have been allowed to get free into the box. And it just goes to show, you know, even though they were targeting him throughout the whole game and he was struggling quite a lot because he was nowhere to be seen, out of position quite a lot, there still nothing really came to fruition by them attacking down that left hand side. But then as soon as he comes off and you take someone who is not doing great but not doing bad, you take him off, move Jeffrey Slutt to left back, considering he hasn't played there all season, he's been playing as a central midfielder. You move him back there, and obviously he's playing a bit too narrow, trying to deal with the threat they have up top, and that's basically neglected the fact that they actually have basically on the fullback positions they have fantastic attacking players, and essentially because we were concentrating too much on the central players, obviously allowed Ashley Young to go through and score. And I do think if Van Aanholt had been on the pitch, it's not certain that Ashley Young doesn't score that goal, but I certainly do think there's less chance of him doing it. So overall, Patrick Van Aanholt here, not the best performance, not the worst. Fairly quiet in that first half, even though he looked to get forward. And in terms of the second half, it was much the same, even though he was looking to once again get involved. But I do think the fact that he was targeted by United for, you know, really just goes to show that he wasn't necessarily playing to his best. And obviously, even though it was quite a weird substitution, you know, rather than taking off or rather than bringing on another midfielder or bringing on someone like Chiarte to play there and taking off someone like Jeffrey Slutt, you take off Van Aanholt and move Jeffrey Slutt back and move Chiarte there, which really I didn't really understand that sub. So overall, not the best performance, not the worst, and hopefully, obviously people have raised the question, maybe it was an injury why he was taken off, but personally for me, I think it was a tactical sub by Hodgson, didn't quite work out, so hopefully we'll see the best at the weekend against Burnley, maybe a Van Aanholt where he comes back to his best and continues his resurgence, let's say, back to his old self. But overall, Patrick Van Aanholt here, I do think the 5 is a fair result. So now I'm going to move on to the first player in our midfield, and that is our captain, Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, to be honest, much like with Martin Kelly, there isn't really too much to say about Luka's performance, because it was a fairly sort of lacklustre performance in the fact that he wasn't necessarily as involved as he usually is, and in terms of the influence he has both offensively and defensively, we didn't really quite see that in this game. Now, in terms of the first half in particular, I do think his passing was absolutely atrocious, and you know, it was very off in that half, and I don't know whether it's just the fact that the pressure United were putting us under, or just the urgency to get rid of the ball sort of led to mistakes in terms of the passing and giving away possession. Whatever it was, Luka wasn't quite at his best. Now, there was one chance in particular where he's gone to clear the ball and he went out for a corner, which just really goes to show, you know, how off he was and how sort of lacklustre he was playing in that first half, in the fact that he went to clear the ball and it ended up going out for a corner. Now, in terms of his defensive work, aside from passing and aside from, you know, getting the ball out of danger, quite a number of challenges that he actually lost in the middle of the park in there. Something that usually you'd expect him to do. He loves to put in a crunching tackle, likes to win possession back for his team. And whilst we've seen that in the last few weeks or so, whether it's the fact that this is a midweek game and maybe he's still a bit fatigued from the weekend, whatever it was, he was losing quite a lot of challenges down the middle, which of course is something we don't usually expect. Now, obviously, going back to that chance in particular, the fact that he put the ball out for a corner, yes, nothing did come from that corner, I do think, but the fact that he just seemed so willing just to give the ball away, rather than actually thinking about it and trying to put a good clearance out, maybe for a throw-in, or maybe just punting it to, you know, De Gea, rather than actually just openly giving possession away by giving away a corner. Obviously, he just seems so intent of actually giving the ball away. But you've got to give him his credit, because whilst in the first half his passing was atrocious, he was losing lots of challenges. In terms of our sort of resurgence in the second half, where we were a lot better, I suppose the way to put it is the fact that he just worked hard for the team, essentially. I don't really think, there's any other way I can put it into words. I just think that in the first half he was fairly disappointing, but in terms of us getting back into the game, trying to get on that front foot, and even though he wasn't necessarily directly involved in all of our good play in that second half, especially when we were playing sort of really, really well in that second half period, I still think he was working hard to actually get us back into the game. And certainly in terms of his passing, in comparison to the first half, you know, his passing was a lot better in the second, and in terms of the challenges he was making, the way he was getting involved in the game, that was also better. So I suppose you could argue it was a game of two halves. First half, absolutely atrocious. Second half, an improvement, not necessarily the best, but an improvement nonetheless. So I do think overall the 5 is a fair result. Now, do comment below with your thoughts about his performance, and also comment below about what you think. Once again, this question's going to rise up, but what you think our midfield 3 should be this season. Now, I think, you know, as the captain, that position's almost guaranteed. So the other 2 players in our midfield 3, comment below with who you think they will be. You know, whether you think McArthur and Jeffrey Slupp keep their places, whether you think Meyer comes back in, whether you think Meyer comes back in, but then also with Chiarte and both McArthur and Jeffrey Slupp drop to the bench. Whatever you think your combination is for the midfield, do comment up below, because I do think the midfield that ended the game, in the fact that Chiarte and Meyer were playing alongside Luka, that seemed to be the good combination. And when you consider most of our good play, or most of the good play from Luka in particular, came from when he was playing alongside these 2, really begs the question as to, yes, obviously he played well recently and this was just an off game for him, but maybe it begs the question, he plays a lot better, especially under the top, really top quality teams. Maybe he plays better with the other players around him. But overall, Luka Milivojevic here, the captain, not the best performance, not the worst from him, but certainly a game of 2 halves, where his first half was very disappointing, and obviously the second half looking to and helping us to get back into the game. So for that reason, I do think the 5 overall is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to his midfield partner, James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, in terms of McArthur's form coming into this game, obviously game at the weekend, got 2 assists, and of course that made it 3 assists in 2 games. So of course he's on a nice run of form, and actually he nearly made it a 3rd assist within 2 games, where quite early on in the game, done really brilliantly to create some space in the area, pick out Andros Townsend, but of course, unfortunately for us, he obviously couldn't find the target. So once again, going back to our sort of clinical edge, you know, I said at the weekend we were really clinical, had 5 shots and a goal, scored 4 goals, so we were really clinical at the weekend, and I thought, could this be a turning point? You know, we're finally getting that clinical edge back. But as shown by this game here, the fact that we had more shots than United, the fact that our expected goals was higher than United's, really just goes to show that we were having chances and we were creating chances, especially in that second half, but we couldn't finish them. But of course, McArthur in particular had a really great chance to get an assist, which would have been his 3rd in 2 games, obviously 4th in 3 games, which would have been obviously great to see. But unfortunately, his teammates around him, Townsend, obviously in that particular moment, couldn't quite finish the chance and couldn't hit the target. But nevertheless, it was obviously nice to see McArthur, rather than play, when he's been quite bad this season, he's sort of been playing in advanced positions but not really been doing much, and he's been quite anonymous. So it's now nice to see him actually playing in that role, continuing to play there, and that we're now starting to see the best of him. So whereas before he'd sort of drift between defensive and offensive work, now he seems to be a lot more further up the pitch, even though he still does defensive work, a lot more further up the pitch, and that was just evident by the fact that he's looking to get the ball to people like Townsend. So that was of course nice to see. Now, whilst his first half was quite good, and I suppose he's the opposite to someone like Luka, Luka's first half weren't great, second half was better. McArthur was the sort of guy where I suppose you could say it was fatigue, but once again just fizzled out as the game went on, and that's why in the second half he was replaced, and that's just because he drifted out of the game, his influence sort of seemed to dwindle, and essentially the reason I think that is just because of the fatigue, or maybe it's just the fact that he gave his all for the team, as we've seen with the few chances he created for people like Townsend, and essentially I do think it was the right decision to take him off. Whether I would have taken him off, or who I would have taken him off, maybe that you could debate whether that should have been different. Maybe someone like Chiarte, I'm not sure, was it Chiarte? Yeah, anyway, it would have been better for maybe someone like Chiarte to come on a little bit earlier in the game, maybe from McArthur, because obviously he wasn't necessarily playing to his best standards. So maybe someone like Chiarte, just to give us that extra boost, rather than leaving McArthur on for as long as we did, because obviously his influence was dwindling. Maybe something like that would have been better, but of course I'm not going to question Roy Hodgson, because of course he made the subs when he thought they were right, and obviously we've got to really question his weird sub by taking Patrick Vanana off. But in terms of the midfield, you know, McArthur, even though he played well and he's a player that Roy Hodgson trusts, maybe it would have been better just to see him come off the pitch a little bit sooner, just because his influence wasn't really that great in the game. But overall, James McArthur, once again, much like quite a lot of players in the podcast, isn't really too much to talk about him, other than the fact that that assist, which, or what would have been an assist if Townsend had finished his chance, because aside from that, wasn't really involved as he has been in recent games. But I've given him a 6, because in comparison to other players who there's not a lot to talk about, I do think his performance was considerably better. Now moving on now to one of the most contentious players in the side here against United, and that is Jeffrey Schlupp. Now, I've seen a lot of people give him 3s and 4s, and I've also seen people give him 6s. So obviously there's quite a lot of debate and quite a lot of division as to how people rate his performances. Now, for me personally, I don't think he had the best game, don't think he had the worst game, so for that reason I'm going to give him a 5 overall. Now, there is quite a lot to cover with him because, like I've said already, in terms of United's goals, he's at fault for them, but then in terms of the one goal that we scored, he was also involved in that with what was a great cross. So there's quite a lot to cover at the moment. Now, in terms of the first goal, obviously I talked already the fact that Joe Ward in particular maybe should have marked Luke Shaw even better, and of course you could argue maybe even Jeffrey Schlupp's not directly involved in that, but maybe he could have done better in terms of closing down people like Lukaku and going to do his defensive work from central midfield, maybe coming back, and maybe he could have done a better job there. So whilst I've seen a lot of people joke, and I personally have said it to a few people, you know, I said Jeffrey Schlupp, you know, he's a fantastic player because he got 4 assists in the game, and that's just because he had a hand in the 4 goals in the game. Because, you know, in terms of the first goal, I'm not going to blame him for it, but maybe he could have done better in the midfield. Obviously the second one for sure should have been marking Lukaku better, or shouldn't have been marking him at all. So, you know, there's quite a lot of debate as to, you know, all the jokes around him, but personally for me, I do think the 5's overall. So in terms of United, they get the first goal. Once again, maybe he could have done better in midfield there, but immediately after that, Palace go up the other end of the pitch, have a great chance, the ball's put into the box by Townsend, and of course Jeffrey Schlupp, because he's playing as a central midfielder, you know, made a run into the box, very central, gone to head the ball, and, you know, whether he just hit it wrong or he hit it at the wrong angle, whatever it was, obviously put the header inches wide. And, you know, if, you know, Townsend essentially put in what was a fantastic cross, which, you know, essentially is what players, what strikers, what attacking midfielders want to be delivered from out wide. So it was a great chance there, but of course Jeffrey Schlupp put that wide. So I suppose that's one of the other reasons why people are using him as a scapegoat, is just the fact that whilst he was involved in the goals we conceded, he also had a chance to get Palace back into the game, but of course missed it. And, you know, that was a really glorious chance, and I can't really highlight it enough, but of course he headed it wide. So once again, we're creating chances, but obviously we're not finishing them off. And once again, you know, you look at that MacArthur, he was obviously supplied Townsend, but then Townsend became provider for Schlupp. So there's loads of players in our attacking lineup who are actually looking to supply players, looking to get on the end of chances. But once again, goes back to that point, the fact that we just seem to be lacking that clinical edge at the minute. Now, in terms of the first goal, I might as well go back to that. You know, there was a very weak attempted tackle to obviously try and get the ball off Luke Shaw. So whilst I'm going to say that Joe Ward was mainly at fault for that first goal because he left Luke Shaw so much space so he could get the cross in, you've also got to look at Jeffrey Schlupp in the midfield and go, yes, you're the left-sided midfielder, but sometimes you've got to drift out to that right-hand side or to the central midfield, the central midfield position to do your work. And, you know, sometimes you just got to take one for the team, and I would have rather him actually get carded by just putting a block or putting a tackle on Luke Shaw, taking him to the ground, as opposed to just trying to make a half-hearted tackle, not making it, and then Luke Shaw glides past him, puts the ball to Lukaku, and he scores. And of course that broke the deadlock, made it 1-0, and at that point it was like, you know, once United scored, they're going to take a real good sort of control and grip on the game, and we're not going to get back into the game. And that was exactly the case. Now, obviously Jeffrey Schlupp became provider for one of our, you know, the goal we scored, but nevertheless he could have done better and avoided what would have been a very simple thing to do. If he had just closed down Luke Shaw, just made a tackle, took one from the team, maybe it would have been a different story there. Now, in terms of the second goal that Lukaku scored, and United's second to make it 2-0, he was obviously involved in that once again. Now, that was obviously early in that second half, and you could argue that's sort of the worst time to score, because you've just come out of the second half 1-0 down, you've got a chance, you know, to get it back to 1-1, but then you sort of get that killer blow, making it 2-0. And essentially, it was just because he failed to jump and actually clear his lines when when the ball came to Lukaku, and essentially he took full advantage of that Lukaku, no real challenge, and obviously headed the ball in. Now, of course, there's going to be questions as to why Jeffrey Schlupp was marking the biggest player on the pitch. And like I said already, I think that someone like James Tompkins should have been marking him. But then, on the other hand, you've got to look at it and go, actually, you know, sometimes you've got to mark players who are bigger than you or who are stronger than you. And sometimes you've just got to do what you have to do, you know, even if that means you're sort of climbing above them, or even if that means sort of coming up really close to them without conceding a penalty, just trying to block the header or make it difficult for him. Or even if it's just, you know, you take a deflection and you get yet another corner. Whatever it is, just do something rather than sort of failing to jump and essentially getting punished for that. And I suppose that's the frustrating for him, because whilst Jeffrey Slupp for some periods of the game was playing all right in midfield, it's just little mistakes like the one not making a tackle on Luke Shaw, like not actually jumping or failing to clear his lines for Lukaku's second goal. There's little things like this where, yes, he wasn't terrible throughout the whole game, hence why I've given him a 5, but it's these little mistakes which of course people are going to pinpoint and of course stick on him as to why he is the scapegoat for this game. Now, like I've said already, you know, I've given him a 5 because I've given him that benefit of the doubt, and that's because he did make amends for them 2 mistakes, and of course he doesn't make up for them, but he made slight amends, and that was just a fantastic assist for Joe Ward. And you know, you've got to give credit here, because Jeffrey Slupp, quite a lot of the time I've been saying, you know, or especially last season, his crossing isn't that great, and you know, with Aanholt sort of cemented that left back position, I said play Jeffrey Slupp at left wing, see what he can do, and he didn't really impress me. And one of the reasons for that is because he wasn't crossing into the box. So actually, whether it's just a change of formation, because he's now, rather than attempted crosses from outside or from out wide, he's now doing it slightly more narrow. Whatever it was, he obviously made that fantastic cross into the box, lovely weight on it, lovely height on it, and of course Joe Ward, lovely diving header, scores from it. So whilst it doesn't make up for the 2 mistakes he made prior to that, it was still nice to see him actually make that run into the box and actually put in a nice delivery for Joe Ward. And obviously you don't expect a right back to be in the box, but if he can continue making runs like that into the box this season and put the ball on the plate for that, because I'm sure people like Michy Batshuayi, Benteke, Zaha, even Townsend as well, they're going to love chances like that. So if Jeffrey Slupp can continue to make these lovely bursting, tenacious runs into the midfield, then maybe we're going to have other players who of course can, you know, drive forward, get in these positions and get on the end of them. And of course, like I said already, I can't really highlight it enough, you know, that's got to be one of our assists of the season, purely based on the fact that it was just such a fine cross. Now, to be honest, the reason why we conceded that third and that final goal from United, well, I'm not going to blame it purely on Jeffrey Slupp, because of course the fact that he was playing narrow was because the rest of the team was playing quite narrow as well. But of course, because he was playing too narrow, and because he was sort of tucked in behind the 2 centre backs, that essentially awarded Ashley Young too much time and enough. I suppose it's enough time and enough space to actually think about his shot. He obviously picked his shot with the shot, and because Jeffrey Slupp was playing narrow, it just allowed Ashley Young to make the run into the box and score to make it 3-1. So whilst you could say it was avoidable, because obviously if he had been playing out wide, or if Van Aanholt had still been on the pitch, maybe he would be playing a bit more wide and it wouldn't have happened. But then on the other hand, you've got to look at it and go, the reason he wasn't playing, or the reason he was playing so narrow, is because, you know, the rest of the team were doing that to obviously contain the threat that United had up top. So there's sort of 2 sides to it. You've got to look at it and go, he was doing the right thing in terms of playing narrow to stop the central threat that United had, but then the negative of that is the fact that it negated the fact that they also have, because they switched to a back 3, their fullbacks were now attacking, and of course that allowed Ashley Young that time to get through. So overall, you could argue that for all 3 goals you've got to blame Jeffrey Slupp, mainly for the second and third one, so Lukaku's second and Ashley Young's first. You know, you've got to look at them and go, that second one, he's obviously got to at least try and jump and actually try and, you know, make that block from Lukaku to obviously stop him scoring that. Obviously the third one from Ashley Young, he's got to at least try and actually get something on there, try and at least, you know, rather than playing narrow, actually try and drift out wide last second to try and get a blocking or challenging. And of course the first one, not really going to blame him too much for that, but he surely, you know, you're looking at the build up to that goal, and he should have at least attempted to tackle Luke Shaw. But overall, his midfield performance was alright, hence why I've given him 5. And the fact that he made slight amends for that with a fantastic assist for Joe Ward's goal was a positive as well. So whilst it wasn't the greatest performance, I'm not going to necessarily use him as a scapegoat like other people are saying. So I do think the 5 overall is a fair reflection of his performance. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in our front 3, and that is Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, I've talked quite a lot already in the fact that some players had games of 2 halves, and the fact that their first half was fairly quiet, and of course in terms of the second half, where Palace were in the ascendancy, we improved drastically. Obviously they were much better in that half. Now, Townsend was actually one of the few players who actually came out with a little bit of credit from that first half, and the reason for that is just because he was our biggest threat in that half, and that's just because he was on the end and he was creating quite a few chances for us. Now, of course, with MacArthur, I highlighted a chance in particular where MacArthur got free inside the box, made loads of space, put the ball to Townsend, and of course Townsend put it wide. So there was one chance in particular where, of course, Townsend could have done better. But in terms of just being threatening, it wasn't just him actually finishing chances. He was obviously actively looking to create chances for his teammates, and that's what you want to see from players, because even if you're having a bad game as a team, you at least want to create chances, because eventually one of them's going to come off. And yes, we haven't been clinical this season, but if you're looking at our expected goals, you know, the amount of chances we're creating, eventually something's going to happen. So it's nice to see Townsend actually being threatening in that respect, in terms of trying to get forward, you know, as much as possible. Now, in terms of just two efforts in particular, I want to highlight. Obviously, one of them you probably should have done a lot better from, and of course, you know, that one in particular, which is the one I've already highlighted, was the one from MacArthur. So whilst there was two efforts in particular, you probably could have done a lot better with that one in particular. From that James MacArthur cross or pass should have been a lot better than it was. But then on the other side, going away from his goal scoring or his chances to shoot, there was obviously a time where he produced a lovely fine cross into Jeffrey Slupp, and of course Jeffrey Slupp put it wide, didn't really trouble De Gea. But it just goes to show you've got two sides of Townsend's game there, where this is something that's been lacking for other players in the side, so it was nice to see him step up and actually do it in the game. And that was just essentially being the provider in terms of putting balls in for people like Jeffrey Slupp, albeit once again we're not clinical, so he missed it, but then on the other hand he also had chances himself. So it was nice to see a little mix in his game there between actually him creating chances and him being on the end of chances as well. Now, after the break, I think he sort of carried on the fight, so he carried on that determination, and even when we did go 2-1 down, 2-0 down before the 2-1 we scored, before we went on to score that goal, I still think he actually carried that fight by actually actively looking to carry on what he was doing in that first half, looking to go forward, and especially in terms of hitting United on the break, that was something he was actively looking to do that. So that was obviously quite effective in terms of the attacking chances we had. And yes, we weren't the greatest in that half in terms of, you know, converting our chances, but the fact that we still had chances, especially on the break, was obviously great to see. And one of the reasons why he was so effective on the break was just that direct running that he has, the fact that he was willing to run at centre backs, running at full backs, the fact that he was doing that with his direct running whilst also providing dangerous balls into the box was of course good to see. But once again, going back to that lack of clinical edge, it just sort of lacked that sort of lack of a final ball, was something that was really missing from his game here against United, because he was doing all of the right things by making runs into the box, putting balls into the box, delivering balls to his teammates, but obviously lacked that final ball, whether that be a cross which maybe was a little bit better, even though the cross to Slupp was good, maybe a little bit better for someone like Slupp, who's obviously not known for his headering, or, you know, actually taking your chance better like the one from MacArthur. So whichever way you look at it, he was obviously arguably one of our better attacking players throughout the whole game. And I suppose looking at the game over 90 minutes, I've given him a 6, because just over the game he was just consistently average is what I like to say, because across the whole game can't really fault him for not putting in any effort, because he obviously kept up that same level or that same standard throughout the whole game. So I do think the 6 is a fair result. You know, probably could have done better with the few chances he had, but it was obviously nice to see him on the other hand create chances for his teammates as well. So overall, I do think the 6 is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the striker in our front three, and that is Michy Batshuayi, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, of course, after the Leicester game, I talked quite a lot about Michy Batshuayi because he had a really good game, scored that great goal, and of course was really involved in all of our good play against Leicester. Now, of course, it was slightly disappointing coming into this game here, the fact that he wasn't necessarily as good as he had been previously. But, you know, sometimes players will, you know, have a really good game, then the game after that they might have an off game. And understandably, the fact that the 4 games I think is that Batshuayi's played for us, you know, at least you're looking at least 2, or the first 2 games he played for us, and then if you're including the FA Cup, that was an off game there. So you're looking at 2 or 3 games that he's played for us where out of the 5 he's played really, really well. So of course maybe this was just one of the off games here, but whatever it was, I've given him a 5 because it exactly was that. Now, quite early on actually, he was involved in an attacking move. Obviously a nice turn inside the box, nice run towards goal, but of course, you know, his sort of effort he took, or the shot he took, really lacked any direction, and it was obviously way off target. So whilst it was actually nice to see a striker actually attempt to score from distance, actually attempt to have a shot on goal, yes, it might go wide, yes, the goalkeeper might save it, but at least attempt it. But obviously on that occasion, even though the build up to it was good in terms of that nice turn, that nice run, he done everything right other than score it. And I suppose that's something that Ayu's done quite a lot this season, in the fact that he's done I suppose it's the first phase he's done really well in terms of getting the ball further up the pitch, making runs, making turns. So he's done all the right things with that, but then when it comes to finishing it, the second or third phase, he's obviously not quite good in that. And I suppose as the game sort of wore on, you know, he missed that great chance early on in the half, which was a really great chance, and as the game sort of wore on, he sort of drifted out as that first half wore on. So I suppose he started the game raring to go, had that shot because obviously he was up with confidence, looking to, you know, get something from the game, but then because he missed it, it seemed to just sort of absolutely shatter his confidence, and obviously, like I said, as that first half wore on, he seemed to drift out of the game even more. Now actually, after the break, so after half time, much like the whole team, he actually had a decent impact. He seemed to improve and was looking to get involved much more, and the reason he got involved much more is just because rather than in the first half where he was sort of drifting about up front, he was actually looking to chase everything down, you know, putting pressure on the back four, the goalkeeper. So the fact that he was doing that was an improvement on that first half. And actually there was one moment in particular where he got into sort of a little bit of a scrap disagreement with Smalling and Victor Lindelof, and obviously that's all just really summed up his game in the fact that he was doing a few good things, but it was just overall frustrating, you know, the fact that he missed a few chances, the fact that he got into that little bit of a scrap with the two United defenders. So overall, not one of his better showings, but I do think, for me personally, looking back at the game, obviously he had a few chances to score, missed them, so we've obviously got to talk about that, but then also we've got to talk about the fact that he was very isolated throughout the game. So one of the main reasons why he wasn't that great, and whilst he was sort of didn't have as many chances as he would have liked, even though he had a few and he missed them, so that's on him. But then on the other hand, we didn't really supply him with enough. So you've got to look at both sides of the story, and the fact that he was isolated for quite a lot of the game is, for me personally, one of the reasons why he weren't playing that great as well. So overall, Michy Batshuayi started the game really well, but the fact that he missed that early chance seemed to knock his confidence throughout the whole game. And whilst he did improve a little bit in that second half after the break, I do think the fact that he was just overall isolated really just reflects and epitomises his performance overall. So for that reason, I do think the 5 is a fair result. So do comment below with your thoughts. Who should start the next game? Whether Christian Benteke should start, because obviously he came off the bench and done pretty much the same as Batshuayi did. So do comment below who you think should start in our front three. But personally for me, Batshuayi, he's had good games for us. He's had a few sort of average games for us. So hopefully this was just one of his average games for us. And of course he can go back to the standard he set, obviously against Leicester at the weekend. So I'm now going to move on to the final player in our starting 11, and that is Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, much like Townsend, actually, Zaha was one of our better attacking players throughout the whole game, and I've given him a 6 because I do think, you know, he's still, even though United were by far the better team for the majority of the game, over 90 minutes, I do think in terms of our attacking threat, Zaha was obviously involved in that. Now, I suppose in looking back at the game and, you know, looking at, you know, comments people have said before and after the game, and the fact that Zaha was on a great run of form, the biggest compliment he can really take from this game is the fact that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer actually deployed 2 fullbacks on him throughout the whole game, and essentially the reason why Zaha wasn't quite at his best was just because of how well the defenders done against him. So I suppose the fact that Solskjaer actually saw his threat and identified it, you know, obviously there's been other players who've played consistently well for Palace this season, like Townsend, you know, players like him in particular who, when Zaha hasn't been playing well, they've stepped up. So of course there's been other threats that Palace have, but the fact that in particular, considering he scored 2 goals at the weekend, you know, United targeted Zaha, not necessarily quite maliciously like other teams do, but they just targeted him with 2 players marking him, and that did restrict him throughout the whole game. But then, because Zaha's so good, it's actually easier said than done in terms of just putting players on him to mark him, because actually quite a lot of the time Zaha was able to get the better of the defenders marking him by producing brilliant bits of skill to get past them, or, you know, just evading the space, using his skill and his pace to get in behind. Whatever he was doing, quite a lot of the time he was able to do it to evade the attention of the 2 United players in particular, you know, that were marking him. And especially in the first half, where I do think in the first half he was sort of our second best attacking player, because obviously Townsend was the best, and in terms of the second half he was a constant threat to United, and Townsend sort of went to the second best attacking player and Zaha went to the best attacking player. Now I do think, especially, obviously he was fairly quiet in that first half because of how well United defended against him, but he still had a few chances himself. But the thing that I liked is that after that second half, like I said already, he obviously improved in terms of his attacking play, but I just think that after the break he had a header which went over the bar, he had a few tricks and a few bits of flicks as well, so he had a chance himself, which of course you wouldn't expect him to score with headers except if it's against Brighton, so of course you're not really going to expect him to score there. But then also a few flicks, a few shots here and there, and yes, he wasn't really able to get the one over his old club. He still hasn't scored against Man United for Palace, but nevertheless the fact that he was trying to do skills to get Palace back into the game, the fact that he was actively looking to get forward and try and help us get back into the game was of course good to see. And the main thing really for me is just the sheer fact that he gave Ashley Young a torrid time throughout the game. Yes, Ashley Young went on to score, and that's great for him, but if you're looking aside from the goal, Ashley Young had a horrible game up against Wilfried Zaha. Every time he was using his pace to get in behind him, you know, running past him, putting balls into the box, and essentially it's just because Ashley Young couldn't quite catch up with him. And obviously, much like United were attacking Patrick Van Aanholt in the Palace team, obviously we were attacking Ashley Young in the United team by just putting Zaha on him, because every time he had success getting past him. So overall, I do think Zaha fully deserves the 6. Isn't really too much more to say about his performance other than the fact that he played relatively well and was arguably one of our better players. But the reason I do think he was restricted in the game is just because of how well United defended against him. But obviously you've got to give him credit for that, because even though he was fairly quiet by his standards, it was just because of how well United defended against him, because they knew the threat he posed. So I do think overall the 6 is a fair result. Maybe you could argue he should have done better with the header, which he put over the bar, but then also maybe a few other chances if he had done a little bit better with them, or maybe if there's a few other chances where rather than taking one for himself, or rather than trying to do a skill, just try and provide it to someone else inside the box, maybe that would have been a better option. But overall, I do think the 6 is a fair result. And, you know, like I've said, comment below with your thoughts on our front line. You know, who should start, Benteke or Batshuayi, and obviously who you think will best suit Townsend and Zaha, because of course they're going to be the guys playing in the 4-3-3 out wide. So of course, who you think will not only better suit the Palace system, but also suit the players who are going to be around them. So whether you think Benteke will be better to be served by Zaha and Townsend, or whether you think Batshuayi will actually be a better combination with them two players. So do comment below with your thoughts on that. So now I'm going to move quickly onto the substitutes. Not going to spend too much time here because, you know, they didn't really have the desired impact you would have liked, and, you know, well, I suppose one of them had the desired impact, but the other two came on the pitch, didn't really make that much difference. Now, in terms of Max Meyer, I'm going to give him a 6 overall, because he brought something to the game that we'd been missing, especially in that second half where we were in the ascendancy, but we didn't quite have that telling edge, or that final edge, or that clinical edge, other than the goal we scored to get back into the game. And the thing that he brought was just a bit of urgency. So the fact that he was looking to speed play up, looking to get forward, looking to use his creativity, that was of course something we had been missing. Now, obviously I said that MacArthur played quite well, and that certainly was the case, but Max Meyer just brought us that little bit more urgency, a little bit more pace, a little bit more creativity, and that's something that MacArthur had been missing in the game. Now, personally for me, I would have taken off Jeffrey Slop and kept MacArthur in midfield and actually brought on Max Meyer, because playing MacArthur deep can be quite good in that position. So playing MacArthur deep, move Max Meyer further forward, that would have been a great thing to do. Obviously he ended up coming off from MacArthur, and like I said, MacArthur didn't have a bad game, but just that sheer influence that Max Meyer made over the bench by just giving us that bit more urgency. The fact that within a minute he came on the pitch, he had a shot from distance which forced De Gea into a save, just really goes to highlight the impact he had. The fact that he came off the bench and straight away he was involved. So the fact that he brought us something that we'd been missing, and, you know, you could argue he came a little bit too late, because if we'd brought him on sooner, or even if we'd started him, then maybe he could have had more influence in that respect. But like I've said already, brought us that little bit of urgency, had a couple of efforts, especially one that tested De Gea, and even though the other ones went wide, it was just nice to see him actually have that impetus to go forward. So I do think overall a 6 is a fair result. And of course, once again, there's going to be a debate as to who should start in midfield, but personally for me, the midfield that finished the game with Max Meyer and Kouyaté alongside Luka should really be the one that we should be looking at going forward. Now, Christian Benteke, I'm going to give him a 5 overall. He obviously came on quite late in the game for Michy Batshuayi. Both of them were fairly ineffective in the game, but in terms of Benteke in particular, in injury time he had a deflected effort, nothing really came off that. So once again, he's getting on the end of chances, which is great, because last season he weren't getting on the end of chances, and also didn't score many goals. This season it's nice to see him getting on the end of chances, but he's still lacking that little clinical edge, as we saw with that one where it deflected. But I suppose in looking at the time he was on the pitch, that's really the only real thing he done of note. So I suppose that's a little bit concerning overall. So I do think the 5 overall is a fair result. And in terms of Cheikhou Kouyaté, came on quite late in the game, or not late in the game, but he came on when it was 2-1. Seconds later it was 3-1. Can't really fault him for that, because he's literally just come onto the pitch, and obviously it was his teammates who let him down there. So I'm not really going to give him a rating, mainly because I don't think he really touched the ball much. Came on just to sort of I suppose shore up the team, because of course Van Aanholt went off, so Jeffrey Slot moved to left back, so of course he came on to be that replacement replacement in midfield, but I suppose the damage was already done and we couldn't really see the best of him. And normally he's brought on to see out the games, but in this case he was just brought on to make up the numbers in midfield, because of course we missed the midfielder going to left back, and of course, you know, wasn't that great in the end. So overall, Tricky Karte, no rating, but you know, the other two substitutions, Max Meyer was absolutely fantastic, you know, making an impact, exactly what you want for players off the bench, and Benteke less so, even though it was a positive to see him actually finally getting in the end of chances. Now, just to go over a small summary of the game, you know, I suppose it's a cliche thing, but it was certainly a game of two halves. First half, we were absolutely dreadful, deserved to be behind, but then in the second half, the chances we had, the shots we had, we were much better in that second half, and certainly didn't deserve to win the game, but certainly deserved a bit more from the game. You know, the amount of chances we had, if we'd been a little bit more clinical, then maybe we would have had another goal to show for it, maybe something else which would have warranted our sort of resurgence in that second half. Now, to be honest, it wasn't the result we wanted, but then I suppose it was inevitable because we never seemed to beat United away, and you know, an evening game, Wednesday night, bit fatigued from the weekend prior, so of course you can understand it not being the best game. And yes, we didn't really. It would have been nice to make it 7 games unbeaten, or even that would have been a nice run to go on. But then United, on the other hand, they're also on a fantastic run of form, so obviously we never beat United anyway, so that is sort of inevitable that we're going to lose to them. But then, you know, they're one of the most informed teams in Europe at the minute, so it's no real embarrassment to lose to them because they're by far a quality side. And you know, even though United had injuries, the squad they had was, you know, £200 million to assemble the squad they had, and that's meant to be their injury hit 11. You know, that's meant to be the players who their second string 11. So the fact that their 11 is worth more than probably the Palace sort of first 11 really just goes to show the depth they've got. And really, even though they had injuries, we also had injuries for 2 of our best players. So overall, you know, losing to one of the most informed teams in Europe isn't really an embarrassment. And the fact that we at least got the goal in the game was, of course, made it a little bit less disappointing than it would have been. But in terms of the goals we conceded, it was just purely down to the defending let us down. First goal, not closing down Shaw, not closing down Lukaku. Second one, Jeffrey Slupp, poor marking on Lukaku, not trying to jump for that goal. And of course, the third goal, even though Jeffrey Slupp was probably playing narrow to stop the central threat that United had, he probably should have drifted out slightly further wide. And obviously, if he had done it, he probably would have dealt with Ashley Young better. So obviously, like I've said, poor marking, too much space in behind, so little defensive mistakes here and there, and sometimes it just goes to show how good it is when you have your best players playing, because you just realise how good they are. But like I've said already, defending obviously let us down. But I suppose one of the positives I'm going to take from the game is that we always seem to lose to United, so at least we got something from the game, in the fact that we've got a goal to show for the amount of chances we had. So it was nice to see us get a goal. Nice bullet header from Joe Warden, of course, a really well taken goal from someone who's a really unlikely goal scorer. But finally for me, you know, moving aside from the United game, this was sort of a free hit game. Weren't really expecting much from it anyway, and that's exactly what we got. But in terms of the game we got at the weekend, a really big game against Burnley. You know, they're below us in the table by 1 point. We lose that, we obviously go just above Brighton in the league, and we're drifting back to that relegation zone. If we get a result, 33 points, and we're slowly touch wood getting to safety. So a really big game against Burnley at the weekend. Hopefully, we're obviously not going to get Wan-Bissaka or Sakho back, because obviously Saka's out for the season. Not sure about Wan-Bissaka, but even if they don't come back from injury, we've just got to make sure we up our game, stay solid at the back, and actually convert our chances going forward. So a really big game against Burnley at the weekend, and hopefully we can get a result. So I'm now going to move on to my Man of the Match award, but before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and who I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now, as you obviously heard in the player ratings, in the fact that it was a pretty disappointing performance from Palace, albeit it was expected considering the form that United were on and the fact that we never beat them. But nevertheless, I do think it was a game of 2 halves, in the fact that in the first half we were extremely disappointing, but actually in the second half, when we actually tried to put some pressure on and we actually started to sort of get out of the second gear, let's say, we actually started to play quite well. But the fact that we had a game of 2 halves, and the fact that it wasn't necessarily the best performance in comparison to, you know, our other games recently, you know, the fact that we went 6 games unbeaten across all competitions just shows we're on a good run of form. So of course it was a little bit disappointing in that respect. And in terms of the Man of the Match, it was quite difficult to pick 4 players, mainly because just across the whole game, you know, there weren't many players who really did impress me, but I've narrowed it down to 4 players, and I do think these 4 players is a fair reflection of our play across the whole field, both in defence and the attack. And obviously the players I've gone with Joe Ward, James Tompkins, Wilfried Zaha and Max Meyer. Now in terms of Joe Ward, obviously first off he scored the goal for us, so in a game where you only score 1 goal, if you have someone scoring a goal, they're most likely going to be on your shortlist. So of course the fact that he scored the goal was great, but obviously the goal itself was a really well taken goal. Obviously Joe Ward hasn't necessarily played that much this season, but obviously made a lovely run into the box and obviously got on the end of that lovely cross and delivery from Jeffrey Schlupp and absolutely hammered that header home, diving header similar to the one against Chelsea a few seasons back. Obviously to get it back to 2-1, yes, we obviously went on to concede and it ended 3-1, but nevertheless at that point when we were in the ascendancy, it obviously was a really important goal in that essence and a well taken strike by Joe Ward. So the fact that he scored the goal is why I put him on here. But in terms of the first half, in terms of his defensive work, I thought he done really well against Alexis Sanchez. So the fact that he dealt with him so well for the majority of the opening 45 minutes was great. And obviously going into the second half, he continued that form relatively well, albeit maybe he could have done better for the other goals. But main thing for me is the fact that he scored our only goal of the game. Now in terms of James Tompkins, obviously, you know, can't really fault him for any of the goals we conceded, and that's just because everything that was thrown at him in terms of a defensive perspective, he done really well. He won the majority of the one-on-one duels against Lukaku, so even though Lukaku scored 2 goals, whenever he came up against James Tompkins, he dealt with him. So for the fact that he just dealt with him so well and so efficiently is why I've put him on my shortlist. And, you know, the fact that he dealt with him so well does beg the question why maybe he should have been marking him at corners instead, because if he can mark him in open play so well, maybe it would have been more efficient there. And it once again goes back to that point about, you know, obviously we were in the ascendancy, but United obviously scored that 3rd goal to make it 3-1. So maybe if we'd taken a little bit of a different approach in terms of maybe utilising Tompkins' ability to do really well against Lukaku, maybe it would have been different. So both Joe Ward and Tompkins, you know, individually in terms of defending against individual players, you know, Joe Ward defending against Alexis Sanchez and James Tompkins against Lukaku. 2 examples there of players who did impress me, albeit they didn't necessarily have the greatest games in comparison to themselves in terms of their performances in games gone by. But the fact that he dealt with some of United's better players well was of course really impressive. Now moving on to Wilfried Zaha, obviously he didn't have the best of games in the fact that I suppose is the fact that United really marked him out of the game, and obviously that restricted him because he could have done a lot more. And I don't really want to say he had a bad game because actually I was really impressed with him, but in terms of what he could have done, that was fairly restricted. But what he did do, especially after the break, after half-time, when we were in the ascendancy, he was absolutely fantastic. And Ashley Young in particular was really struggling against him because Wilfried Zaha was giving him the run around, kept running past him, kept cutting inside, kept you know running on the outside, running on the inside. So obviously Wilfried Zaha was restricted to what he could do because there was 2 players marking him. But when he was coming one-on-one up against Ashley Young, he was having so much joy down that side. So the reason I've put him on my shortlist is mainly because of just how well he done against Ashley Young in terms of the one-on-one situations, but also just his general attacking play. Because yes, he may not, obviously he's in good form at the minute. Yes, he didn't score in this goal or didn't assist, and maybe not necessarily have as many chances as he would have liked, but the fact that he was still an attacking presence, one of our better players, but actually trying to look forward, trying to hit United on the counter-attack, and the fact that he had a few chances as well. You know, there was a header in particular which, you know, went off the bar, a few tricks as well. So the fact that he showed his ability was great to see, but like I've said already, we would have seen a lot more from him if he hadn't been defended by, you know, 2 or 3 players. But like I said, it really goes to show the quality he's got, the fact that he, even though he's being marked by 2 players, he can still get the better of them on quite a few occasions. So for that offensive work, for the fact that he was getting the better of many players in the team, in particular Ashley Young, that's why he's on my shortlist. Now Max Meyer, obviously a man with a lot of debate about him recently, but once again came off the bench and essentially showed why he should be starting games because the quality he brought to the side. And the reason I've put him on my man and match shortlist is just because when he came on, when we were in the ascendancy in that second half, he just gave us that little bit of urgency that we were missing, gave us that little bit more creativity that MacArthur, even though MacArthur was quite good, just gave us that bit of creativity that McCarthy was lacking in the game. So the fact that Max Meyer came off the bench made so much impact by the fact that he had a shot within sort of a few minutes of him being on the pitch that forced De Gea into a save. He had a few other shots as well, which I think one might have gone wide, another one De Gea save. So the fact that he came on with that urgency to use his creativity to actually try and get us forward, try and get us back into the game. The fact that he also combined that with himself taking chances himself was great to see. And like I've said already, a few minutes he's been on the pitch, he already tested De Gea, which just goes to show the impact he had off the bench. So just going over, the 4 players, obviously Joe Ward and Tompkins, I've put them on my shortlist because of just how well I thought they'd done individually in terms of dealing with players. So of course in Joe Ward's case, dealing with Alexis Sanchez, and of course James Tompkins in the fact that he dealt with Lukaku relatively well. And of course Wilfried Zaha and Max Meyer, both for their sort of attacking play. Zaha more so for the fact that he was running on the outside, giving Ashley Young a torrid time, and he was just trying to get to the byline and looking to create stuff for the team. And of course Max Meyer in an attacking perspective, just giving us that impetus and a bit of creativity that we had been missing throughout the rest of the game. But in terms of these 4 players, obviously do comment below if you do disagree, or do comment below which of these 4 players you would have given the Man of the Match award to. But for me personally, it was a debate between sort of 3 players of my shortlist there. The fact that Joe Ward got a goal, he's obviously got to be in my top 3. Zaha, just because of how well he was attacking in the game, and obviously Max Meyer as well for just that urgency he brought off the bench. So for me, even though I've got a 4-match shortlist here, I'm going to narrow it down to them 3 and say, in terms of them, they're my top 3 out of my 4 nominated. And for me personally, I'm going to give it to Wilfried Zaha. So congratulations, Wilfried. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was yet another solid performance from you. Now, the reason I've given it to him as opposed to Joe Ward and Max Meyer is just for the sheer fact that how good he was offensively throughout the game. Because of course Joe Ward got the goal, which was great, but he, for some of the goals he probably could have done better. And then obviously you're looking at Max Meyer, because he came off the bench and he didn't necessarily have as much time to, even though what he did in the short amount of time he was on the pitch was great. Zaha, in terms of his attacking play, done it throughout the whole 90 minutes. So for me, the fact that Zaha was giving defenders a torrid time, using his pace, using his skill, essentially just creating chances for himself and his teammates, just for that general attacking play, is why he wins this week's Man of the Match award. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my Man of the Match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson and Joe Ward following the game.
It was fair to say it was a better performance in the second half from the guys.
Definitely. I think first half we were standoffish a little bit, but I think the second half we gave a good account of ourselves, caused some issues, created chances, and I think on another day we probably would have got another goal to make it 2-2 and carry that momentum in.
Yeah, do you think a bit too much maybe was made in the press about how many injuries they had? Because it was still a strong team they put out, wasn't it?
Yeah, listen, I think Man United is Man United, and they've got the strength in numbers. They can field a second 11 with that can be in the top of the league. So it's you can't take it lightly. You can't take and get complacent just because they've got a few injuries. But today was a good opportunity, and I think second half we were unfortunate not to maybe get another after the goal, and because we put them under a bit of pressure, I started asking them questions and looked dangerous at times. And
obviously it's been a defeat, but pleasing to get a goal. It was similar to that one you scored against Chelsea a few seasons ago.
Yeah, of course it is. At the end of the day, it's the result that matters. It's always nice to get on the score sheet, and it's always nice to be involved in that. But unfortunately, the result is what matters. But we take the performance in the second half, especially into the weekend against Burnley, and hopefully put in a massive performance.
Yeah, and finally, how much are you enjoying being back in the team at the moment?
Listen, obviously, I wouldn't be human if I don't want to play. When I get my opportunity, I want to try and take it. And at the end of the day, I want to play football, and I love being on the pitch, and that's what as a young boy I've always wanted to do. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'll give my best, and I'll give 100% every time I walk out across the white line.
Oh, Roy, I wonder what you made of the game tonight, please. What do you make of the overall performance?
I thought that the best team won. I thought that in the first half we worked hard to keep our shape and keep them at bay, but the fact is they had a lot of control, and I think at times we were perhaps in trying to keep our shape, guilty of a bit of passivity on occasions. I didn't think there were a lot of chances in the first half, but they certainly took theirs well. I thought we started the second half very brightly, and the second goal was a real cold shower, because the first 5 or 6 minutes we looked as if we could do something here. And I think it's great credit to the players that despite that second goal they continued on the front foot as they tried to start the second half, and actually we got back into the game. When we scored the 2-1 goal, I thought that was probably as a result of some pressure that we were exerting and some control that we were establishing in the game. But then, with 20 minutes left to play, we made a few changes, made a few substitutions, went, if you like, to try and get something from the game. And it so often happens when you play teams with this quality, they find a way of picking you off and finishing you off with a third goal. And that's what happens, and that's what did happen. And we can only hold our hands up and admit that they deserve the victory. But we gave it our best shot, especially in the second half.
Roy, when you described the second goal as a cold shower, what, in the fact they had so many headers which weren't intervened?
Well, they got three players who were 6'4" in the team. You know, it's not that easy. It's not easy to stop Chris Smalling winning the first header, and it's not that easy to stop the Lindelof winning the second header, because you've got Pogba taking away one of your best markers as well. And then, of course, then the 6'3" Lukaku gets in on the act, and they're always going to be very dangerous from set plays because they've got good delivery and they've got some very tall players.
Okay, any other questions? Last one then, this gentleman here. Thank you.
Roy, how different a prospect are United from earlier in the season when you went to Old Trafford and got something off them?
Well, the difference is, of course, today that this was a much more even game, in the sense that the possession and the way each team, when they had the ball, was able to mount some quite serious attacks. It was very much a counter-attacking job for us at Old Trafford, and very much a question of defending extremely well and making certain that they couldn't find a way through a very compact defence. So the two games were very, very different. But there's no doubt that they are playing well. Manchester United, I thought tonight that they did very well in areas of the game which aren't always that obvious to the naked eye. I thought their organisation was good. I thought their work rate was extremely good. And of course, as a result, one of the things that we like to pride ourselves on, our organisational work rate, it gets negated to some extent, and then you're faced with the fact that they do have some very, very good players on top of all of that, and sometimes those good players find a way to punish you, as Lukaku did tonight.
Okay.
But so I'm disappointed. It would have been nice to have kept the good run going. It would have been nice to come away with this game with something, but it would have taken an exceptional performance in some way, or maybe a little bit more fortune in some way, because at the moment, the way Man United are going about their business and the way they approach this game tonight, with the seriousness and the determination and the work rate, we were going to have to, in some way, find some goals or find a way of preventing goals, which would always ask a lot of questions of us.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson and Joe Ward had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Manchester United. But make sure to come back next week for my post-match review of the game against Burnley. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.